I learned to ski when I was very young. For the last 25 years, my family has always taken 1 or 2 long weekends out of the year to go skiing. Living in the heart of Appalachia, there is no shortage of ski resorts just a quick car ride away. One of the resorts we regularly find ourselves at is Snowshoe Mountain Resort in West Virginia. We usually stay about 10 miles away in the small town of Cass. Founded by the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company around 1900, Cass was a town filled with company workers who were logging the nearby Cheat Mountain. White houses with picket fences lined the streets in a very orderly fashion. In 1960, the mill closed, and in '63, the state purchased many of the company houses and converted them into lodgings for tourists who come to fish the Greenbrier River, take a scenic train ride up the mountains, or go skiing at Snowshoe. When I was in high school, we made one of our annual trips to Snowshoe. We rented one of the larger company houses to accommodate our large party. I was there with my mother and father, my 2 older sisters, Erin and Susan, Susan's husband, and family friends Matt and Debbie. We'd stayed in Cass before, but this house was different. It was larger than previous houses, with 3 bedrooms upstairs and a kitchen, living room, and dining room on the main floor. It was also the only house in Cass that I've been in that had a basement. So naturally, we had to check it out. It was dark and empty, with a dirt floor that reminded me of a cellar. The only thing down there was the water heater. Susan, Erin, and I got an uneasy feeling we couldn't shake, so we left quickly. It turned out the uneasiness was not unfounded. We settled in on our first night, trying to get good sleep in preparation for a full day of skiing. In the middle of the night, Susan, who was sleeping in the living room, was awakened by the sound of ice shattering outside and the house shaking. She looked out the window and couldn't see anything. No one upstairs had seemed to notice. The next morning, Matt went to his car to find the back window shattered, but it looked like it was broken from the inside. Nothing was stolen, including the beer and skis, which would have been a good target for any thief. Matt assumed some kids had broken into his car and got scared and run off. There being nothing we could do about it, we decided to head up the mountain to ski. Mother and Debbie stayed at the house. Neither of them were big skiers and usually used these trips as an excuse to just get away for a weekend. They were both relaxing in the living room with the television on. Mom decided to brew a pot of coffee. When she walked into the kitchen, the door to the screened-in back porch was wide open, as was the door to the outside. She closed and locked both doors, thinking someone left them open while getting ready that morning, and returned to the living room. After a few minutes, she walked back to the kitchen for a cup of coffee, only to find that, once again, both doors were wide open. Debbie never left the living room, and no one else was in the house. Throughout the rest of the day, my mother kept seeing someone out of the corner of her eye, and felt like someone was in the room with her. That afternoon, while lying on the living room couch, she also heard the sound of a family. Setting the table, preparing for dinner. Our last night in the house, after everyone had gone to sleep, Matt was awoken by the sound of doors opening and closing, and footsteps in the hall. When he fell back to sleep, he was awoken again by Debbie calling his name. She had woken up to see an old man standing over her, trying to lift her out of bed. By the time she called out for Matt, the old man had disappeared. In retelling the story, Debbie said she had the feeling like she was a patient being visited by a doctor. We later discovered the buildings behind the house used to be a doctor's office and an attached hospital.
Hi, I'm Jamie Markey.
And I'm Michael Tatum, and this
is Ghoul Intentions.
Welcome to Ghoul Intentions. I'm just going to say it differently every time.
That's fine. You're allowed to. You do what you fucking want.
Thank you.
For those who heard our last Ghosticles, you might have noticed that we were both under the weather quite a bit.
Like the weather had pinned us to the fucking ground.
It was real bad. I believe I'm going to be getting better because I'm taking all the medicine in the world.
You're certainly going to be getting something.
That's right. I went to the doctor yesterday. I got a steroid shot in my hip.
You got all the things.
I got prednisone. I got an antibiotic.
Yeah.
And pseudoephedrine cough syrup.
Holy shit.
And that I have to be careful of because it makes me feel like I'm just on the other side of stoned.
Oh,
When
like
you
just on like when you're first stoned, or like
yeah,
right
or
before you break through the membrane separating sobriety and stoned, and you're like, here we go.
no, it's when you've gone a little too far.
Oh, so like when you go from high to you'll actually sit there and watch the credits high.
Kind of, but, like, also with a little but like, you've gone too far on that. You're coming down off of a drunk
Oh,
when you just
boo.
it's like,
When it
you
stops
feel
being fun and it starts
okay.
feeling more like I'm tired and sick and I have a headache.
Right, I don't wanna do anything because then I'll get a headache. But if I just lay here and watch bullshit on TV or the YouTubes, scary stuff on YouTube, I'm also much more reactive on it. I'll
Oh,
scream
speaking
at
of scary
stuff.
stuff, we should probably thank Katie for the opening
Oh!
story.
Thank you, Katie, for
Thank you,
that
Katie. That was a
story.
really
It
good
was a very good
story.
story.
I've been skiing once in my life, and I promised myself I would never do it again. A
Oh,
lot
yeah?
of people have pet causes. Mine is don't go skiing.
Oh, I used to go skiing all the time when I was a kid, but my center of gravity was much closer to the ground. I
Yeah.
was water skiing and I would go snow skiing. The last time I tried water skiing, it did not work out.
I also got in touch with a um, physics principle while I was skiing.
You're very tall, so
Fusion. Um,
yeah, yeah,
I fell down a lot.
yeah.
I had those friends. I had friends that were kind of assholes that were like, "Let's take him up a big hill. It'll be funny." And it was.
To
It was
them.
very funny. And it's one of my best stories, but
Oh yeah.
I'll it's another story for
I
another time.
water skiing, I would refuse to let go of the because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to let go of the handle. Then you just sink into the water, right? Whenever you're done skiing. But I knew everybody because I was like 4 at the time. Everybody I saw that let go of the handles fell and flipped all over the place.
That's true.
I wouldn't want to fucking do that shit. And so I would make my grandpa turn off the boat and turn the boat. And then it was the same shit. But for me, I had to hold on or I was going to fly
I mean, I
with
get
those
it. I don't want to
people.
be left behind. I had a fear
Yeah.
of that. So I was like,
Yeah.
no, I'm gonna hold
I'm
on for
gonna
dear
do it.
life.
Yeah.
Oh my
How
God.
how are you feeling?
Better. I'm
Better?
still a little coffee hacky. I think I've been getting good sleep this week.
Yeah.
Um,
That cough syrup
and
helped my
that
sleep
has
immensely
helped a
last
lot.
night. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we realized Brandon and I have not been getting good sleep since we got the puppy
Well,
because we have a puppy. But now
yeah,
that he's sleeping through the night
it
for the
helps.
first time in probably 2 months, we're actually getting more than 5 hours of sleep
Oh,
at
that's
night.
nice.
So I think I'm on the other side of it. I've still
That's
been
good.
able to go and work out, so I haven't been
Oh,
sick
that's
sick. I've
nice.
just had this upper respiratory thing. So it's just like I don't know, I've got a pea plant growing in my lungs or something.
Right.
But nothing else is wrong, thankfully.
So, after you read this story, I went downstairs real quick and had some more cough syrup.
Yes.
I had almost a full dose, not quite. So it should hit when I
You are
finish
going to
my
be
story.
tripping balls,
We will
which is
see
great because when I
how it
get to
goes.
my subject, you might be tripping anyway.
It'll be great. I can't wait for my
Our
reactions.
title, should I tell them the title?
Oh, yes, title.
The title is Blood and Bones. And it
Yes.
comes from a book called The Rifter, Book One, The Shattered Gates by Jen Hale. I assume it's Jen Hale.
Gin or Jen.
Ginn, Ginn, Hale, Hale. And the quote is petty fortune telling was the field of the wishful. Witches dealt in blood and bones.
Yeah.
It's a good one. That's a good
love
quote.
that.
And very prescient for today's topic because
Well,
you're taking us back to Pendle Hill
going back to Pendle
to
Hill
talk
for our
about the witches,
witches.
and I'm talking about well, we'll get to it.
If you have not listened to the Pendle Hill witch trial,
What are you doing with your life?
go listen to that.
It's so fucked up.
Yeah. It's all about it's very witchy. So witchy, in fact, that we didn't have time to get into the haunting and the rest of the area. So
It's so witchy we didn't have time to get ghosty.
that's right. That's right. So, all right. Pendle witch haunting. I got my information from Great British Ghosts. There's a really great article. There's a really great episode where they talk about in Cheshire, there's a hotel that's
Yeah.
haunted.
Yeah.
The something and whistle.
I think everything in England is haunted, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously.
I mean, even if you just drive through there,
It's like,
you're like, that's haunted, that's
they're all
haunted,
ghosts.
that's haunted.
They're all fucking ghosts.
How long has this
Um,
tavern been here? Oh, for 500 years? Oh, yeah, and
It's haunted.
it's the youngest building in town. Okay,
Oh,
cool.
yeah.
Haunted.
Cool.
Clearly.
Are you alive or dead? You just have to ask that to everyone. Nick Ravencroft with BBC News, Wikipedia, of course. Chris
Great
Newton.
fucking name.
Yeah, right. Chris Newton from SpookyIsles.com and The Northern Antiquarian.
Continue.
Okay. So we discussed the Pendle witch trials last episode. This ep we'll be talking about some of the weird shit that goes on in the area. Let's start with a modern discovery.
A modern discovery?
Yes.
Like, of what?
In December 2011,
Oh, shit.
The water company was sent out for some maintenance, and the engineers were stunned to unearth a 17th century cottage underneath a grass mound.
Wow.
The cottage was
A
discovered
whole
a
cottage.
whole cottage underneath a grass mound.
That's some shitty foundation work.
Or some excellent foundation work. It's shitty grassy mound work.
That's true. I guess that would just was
You
swallowed
know
by
what?
the earth.
It's probably all fine because it was the engineers that found it. Like,
That's true. They're like, oh yeah,
the
this is.
mound did a great job covering, and then
You know what? Everyone did a great
everyone
job.
did a great job. We support this. Okay, so the cottage was discovered near the Lower Black Moss Reservoir in the village of Barley in the shadow of Pendle Hill. Historians are now
Mm.
speculating that the well-preserved cottage could have belonged to one of the Pendle witches. They're not
What was the name?
100%
That
sure.
had like it was like shit tower or something. What was it called?
Yes,
What was it called? It was a
Mullen Tower?
Malden
Molten.
Tower.
It's not working yet. Okay, hold on.
Carl Malden Towers. That's a joke for people that grew up in the 80s.
Shit Tower. We're just gonna go with
Yeah,
Shit
it was
Tower.
basically
It was Shit Tower. I can't remember.
It was the crux of the name was that it was an
was
ironic name, so it was like
because it
shit
was
tower.
probably
Shit
just
tower.
a little cottage.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're not 100% sure, but considering the building contained a sealed room with the bones of a mummified cat bricked into the wall, it seems likely.
So many questions.
Right. Mummified cat. Well, it is believed that the cat was buried alive because that was something witches did to protect their homes from evil.
Okay.
So it's likely. Now, of
mean,
course,
I mean, it
there are
still
probably a lot of
seems
that
like a real fucking mean thing to do to a
to the
cat.
cat, right? But it's the same thing with burying the church grim, right? You bury it alive.
Yeah, I guess.
So it's a very similar thing, and it's
Man.
for protection.
I'm so glad for
So the
the
spirit of
SPCA now.
I know, right? The spirit of the animal was to protect the house. Now, it could have been someone in the area that wanted protection from the Pendle witches.
This could be, but like just that conversation you'd have with that cat, like, congratulations, Mr. Whiskers, you're getting promoted to protector of the house. Awesome, that's great. What do I have to do? Well, we're gonna kill you and wall you up.
Yeah, no, we're just gonna wall you up.
Sorry, yeah, we're just gonna wall you up, and you will die from it. So we're just what I said is true, just not in that order.
Right.
God, the cat's like, oh,
Surprises!
great, I'm
Yeah.
excited to be part of this plan. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. So Frank Frank from NP Archaeology, who unearthed the building, said, "It's like discovering your own little Pompeii. We rarely get the opportunity to work with something so well preserved."
Wow.
The engineering project was being put on hold had been put on hold while archaeologists investigated the site. As soon as we started digging, we found the tops of doors and knew we were onto something special. The building is a microcosm for the rise and fall of this area from the time of the Pendle witches to the industrial age. There are layers of local history right before your eyes.
Oh, that's so fucking cool.
I know. The building also contains a 19th century kitchen range, still in its original position.
Oh.
Many artifacts from the building's latter years, such as Victorian crockery, a 10-bath and bedstead, were
So-
discovered around the site.
Also, if it was, it's so odd to think of a house that was still operational in 19th century being able, like, still
Just
completely covered in earth in just 200 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I get obviously it happens, but that's in
Mhm.
my movie, it was a curse, and the earth like literally just swallowed it overnight.
Protected it. It's fucking cool regardless. I thought that was awesome. So,
That is really fucking cool.
Yeah,
Could you
and you
imagine
can
being an
visit
archaeologist
it
being
now.
like, this is amazing. Like,
Yeah.
this is this is not just like, this is a whole fucking cottage.
yeah,
Like, that's a whole fucking, like, a
So-
literal window into
And-
that era.
you can see it. Yeah.
Ah!
So, you'll find a lot on YouTube video,
Mm.
like a lot of YouTube videos with the ghost hunts, right? The walks up to the top of the hill, which is just shy of a mountain, it's a very large hill, is pretty steep and far. And one of my favorite things that I have watched is how tired everybody gets walking up. They'll just like stop and be like, whew, quite a walk.
Can see why they buried this thing originally.
Yeah, and by the time they get up there, it's usually raining and shitty, and like there's this whole saying that if it's not raining on the hill, it's about to be, and if it is raining on the hill, then it's raining down in the city. You know what I mean? It's always raining on the hill. So
Always raining.
So I loved that, and a lot of the folks say that the locals don't like to talk about the witch trials. They'll the locals don't even wanna talk to you about it, but that seems unlikely
I'm
based
I
upon
feel like the locals would be like, "Yeah, this fucking really weird and
Mhm.
not I shouldn't say awesome, that's a terrible word to use in relation to this, but I mean, like, I could see if they were living when the trials happened, but now it's like, "Hey, yeah, our town is it's worth visiting because this thing happened."
It's like Salem, right?
Yeah.
And that's what it seems to be because when they said that, I was like, "That seems really weird," and when I looked into it, no, it's not true at
Well, the
all.
trial influenced Salem, right?
Exactly, considering okay, I've seen interviews with current Nutters that are relatives of Alice Nutter. They still live in the area, and they interviewed
Wow.
them about the witch trials.
Wow.
So, it's and that
Talk about
yeah.
having roots.
Yeah, and it's Nutter for you if you didn't listen, Nutter is her last name. It's not like the slang that they called people who were insane.
Nutter, you total nutter.
Um, yeah, so they talked about the trials. There's also a ton of witch imagery used all over Pendle, much like Salem. They even have a
Hmm.
road called Witch Way. The history has been thoroughly embraced.
I see what they did there.
Yeah. The Witches Galore is said to be a fascinating shop with hundreds of different types of model witches and witchy objects that can be purchased as souvenirs to your visit.
Hmm.
The Rising Sun Pub, which is very close to Pendle Hill, even has witchy brews like Witchfinder General and Broomstick Bitter.
Man, if I were the Pendle Ghosts, I'd be so fucking pissed.
Yeah.
I'd be like, you guys. I mean, I know it's been a minute, but
Also, is there not like a Nutter Ale? Because it's a perfect name for a nutty ale. Point is, I want to go there.
I want to go there too,
Just wait.
but I'm gonna be mad. I'm like,
For the witches. Like, this is
yeah. It
disrespectful.
does. That kind of thing does kind of get on my nerves. I mean, maybe
But
I'm
at
such a fan of
least
history that for me, history is very much alive. And
yeah,
so when people like, I don't know, when some fucking like cottage industry comes in and be like, "Ooh, I can make a buck off of being totally fucking insensitive toward this thing," that actually, if you stop and think about it for a moment, like people were really fucking treated awfully, and it was a
mhm,
tragedy. And now it's on a fucking t-shirt.
right.
It's
But
it's kind of sad to think about. Like the worst thing you're going through right now is the future generation's idea of a tchotchke.
right. But all of that being said, they are remembered because there are a
That's
lot of
yeah, I'll give you that.
people this happened to that they are not remembered, and these women
Yeah.
and little boy are.
Man, but what a
So
price to pay for being remembered.
I know.
Oof.
I know. But
It's
I
like
mean, if you're gonna be hanged and charged with being a witch, might as well be fucking remembered. That's all I'm
I
saying.
got hung as a witch. I got hanged as a witch, and all I got was this fucking
There
t-shirt.
was oh my god, there was this one video I was watching, and they were doing, the spirit box thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Is it the really awful thing that's like
yeah,
like it's because
yeah.
it's tapping into a bunch
Apparently
of frequencies at like rapidly and
yes, and
like
then
until
picks up
like
words or whatever.
which of course is gonna pick up fucking words.
And they
It's
were
tapping
like,
into radio frequencies.
"Yeah, how did you get hanged?" And some of them are really good. And they were like, or "How did you die? How did you die?" And they were like, "Hung." No, they said, "Did you get hung?" And I paused it because Jack was watching with me, and I was like, "If something comes through and says hanged and corrects them, this will be my favorite thing I've ever
And did
fucking
it
seen."
happen?
No, it
Oh
came through as
man.
hung, and I was like, "These witches don't know." I was very disappointed. But, anyway, so it was really funny though. But they do that. Also you can do spirit boxes on your phone now. Like, you can do a phone app. We have to fucking do it. I've also decided the other thing I thought we needed to get for our next ghost hunting adventure
Mm.
is a baby monitor.
Oh my god. Yeah, I just
Yes.
saw the baby monitor, like top 5 creepy baby monitor things.
Yes.
And I gotta say, the creepiest thing is not so much the ghost stuff, which is pretty creepy, but it's
Mhm.
also like, I could see maybe that's something else. I don't know. I gotta tell you, I'm not as impressed. Well, maybe because it's in context, I'm not impressed by the ghost stuff that people find on baby monitors, only because far creepier are the fucking assholes that will hack into it and like play "Somebody's Watching Me" or some
Yes.
shit like that. I'm like,
Yes.
that's way more terrifying is
Oh,
a
yeah.
living person fucking with me. Because a
Right.
ghost, I'm like, well, you're dead. I'll give you. You need something to do. But a living person, I just get mad.
That's yeah. But still, for ghost hunting things, it's like, let's just put some baby monitors in
That
another
would be
room.
fun and
See what
creepy.
we catch.
There's
It'll be
something
fun.
just fundamentally creepy about baby monitors.
Agreed, 1,000%. Thank God we don't have babies. Okay. I don't want a baby monitor.
We're gonna get baby monitors and tell the person at whatever store we go to, they're like, "Oh, we're ghost hunting,"
Yeah,
and we're gonna make that cashier's day as they go, "Wow,
I know.
that's amazing."
Yes.
And
But we
she's
have
gonna
to go to
and
like
in my movie, her name's Deborah, and she's
yeah,
like, "Oh well, don't go with that brand. There's a much better brand
right. But it's
because
at
we
a
use it
used
in my
store because we're
group."
not paying full price for that shit. Okay,
I'll
sorry.
put baby monitors on our wedding registry for me and Brandon, and people will think we're
Yes.
having a baby. Like, no, 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 it's
No,
just
no,
for
no, it's
the
just for
it's just
this.
for
It's for the podcast.
the ghost group
Yeah.
that we're forming.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So speaking of Alice Nutter, there is a legend, which we were speaking about her before, but we're going to go back to her right now. There's a legend that she was actually buried in her family plot.
Right, I
Of
remember that
course, the witches would not have been buried in the graveyard
because it was consecrated
because it
ground.
was consecrated ground. But there's a rumor that the Nutter family paid extra to have her buried there. And if we know anything about
Mm,
churches
they'll
or
take the money.
anything, money matters.
They'll
It's
be
all
like,
about the
it's
money.
consecrated ground, so we can't possibly bury a witch here for less than 20 quid.
Yes, exactly. So there is one grave in particular rumored to be Alice's. It has a skull and crossbones on it. They don't know, though, if that references death because it's a general symbol for death,
Hmm.
or if it's Alice's, but there's no name on it.
Weird.
So the assumption is it is her
But it's a skull and
grave.
crossbones. Maybe it was a plague victim who died, and they
It
would
could
and they
be.
just treated the body like quarantine. But then why? But they
Why
didn't do
not
that.
have a
They didn't.
name?
Yeah, that's
Why not
weird.
do the name? So that's
Maybe to
why.
protect the family from being quarantined.
Yeah, but if they were if it was a wealthy family,
Yeah, that's
so
true. I don't know. That's
I think
weird.
it's I like to think it's her.
I mean, it's a pretty good story. I mean, it's a mysterious
It's
grave
an
with a skull and
I
crossbones on it, and it just
know,
happens to be at the center of all this shit going on. It's
and it's
involved somehow.
and their tomb is right outside the church as well.
Mm, mm, mm.
So in that graveyard is under the shadow of Pendle Hill, and it's called St. Mary's New Church in Pendle. The Nutter tomb right outside the church on the west face of the tower of St. Mary's is so the tower is original, and they've redone it and like
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
So
The tower, but like you mean the tower,
the
like
church tower,
okay, the church
the
tower,
church
not
tower.
the not tower, not the shit tower,
No, not the shit
the
tower.
church
It's
tower.
the church
Okay,
tower where the graveyard
just
sits
keeping
around it.
track of all the towers.
There's a lot of towers. This one is not made of shit. It's made of God and love. And there's a carving on it that's known locally as the Eye of God, which is believed to be put there to protect the town and villagers from witches specifically.
It's like a giant holy baby monitor.
Yeah, it's to me, I think of it. It's a holy baby monitor or an evil eye protector, right? That's kind of what it is.
Mm.
And it's this graveyard in particular is where it's believed some of the items needed to create the pictures or the dolls of particular
Mm.
people used for cursing and things
All
of that
right, the
nature. It's like
puppets. Yeah, right.
the puppets, voodoo doll type
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that's where those items were gathered. They needed human hair and teeth, amongst other things, and it
Oh.
is believed some of the women did make these dolls.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah, I mean we don't know for sure, but
I mean, because I mean,
it
yeah,
was a
the practice it
thing.
was a thing. People did that. I
They did
mean,
it,
whether it worked or not is a different issue, but it was
but they
believed to work, and so people
did go grave
did.
digging for
Yeah,
those things.
yeah.
And this is where they would have gotten those items. And
Mm.
so it's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, are you desecrating that grave?" Whoopsies, ghosts
Ooh.
everywhere. So people in the graveyard will hear faint whispers and voices. They feel pricklings at their feet. And a lot of people just get a very uncomfortable sensation there, just in the grave in particular, or in the graveyard in particular. I'm sure anybody in a grave would feel uncomfortable. Um, so, and that happens day or night. So
Mm.
don't feel like you have to go at night and be that person. And then, okay, a bit down the hill from the graveyard is Ginny Well. Folklore has it that an evil spirit in the form of a boulder would roll down the hill to drink from the well. Realizing the story, the stone contained the spirit of Ginny Greenteeth, a river hag who lured young children into ponds
Ooh,
and
Ginny
drowned them.
Greenteeth. What a
Ginny Greenteeth, I
great
know, right?
name. Beware, Ginny Greenteeth.
Yes, she is the river hag who lured young children into ponds and drowned them.
Ooh, kind of like
A
the Japanese kappa. Like it's a folklore spirit.
Oh,
It's a
yes, it's a
yeah, yeah,
folklore
yeah, yeah.
spirit. A priest took an axe to the boulder and smashed it to pieces. It is said that her ghost still stalks Jenny Lane, now human in form, except for her head, which the priest had chopped up.
Oh, a headless witch ghost.
Yes.
I
Now,
love
I
it.
imagine at some point there was an old woman who had green teeth and she would get her water from that particular well. And the local kids were fucking shitheads and made up story and kids and made up a story about a witch, like all the other witches. Oh, she's like the other witches. She just
She's got green teeth, and
she's
maybe she just was
she's
really
totally
in. Like maybe she like I don't know. There might be some herb that she used to like rub
yeah,
on her gums that helped with
right.
arthritis or
Or
something.
she was old and her teeth were rotting out of her face. I mean,
Could be probably.
back in the day,
I feel like back in especially British people in those days, it's like who the fuck are you to criticize someone's teeth?
I know they're children. Their teeth were fresh.
Ugh, little assholes.
So, voila, a story has been set up. That's kind of my opinion.
Mm, mm,
And I
mm.
feel that way because I did the same thing with a haunted house, made up a story about a house on
Sure,
my street.
sure.
Did I say that? Did I tell you that story?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So for those who haven't heard, it was a house and there was a picture in the kitchen and you could only sit in the backyard. And I would tell people you can see something moving there. And years later, I went back.
Excuse me.
Uh-huh. Years later, I went back and it was people knew the house was haunted and they would tell me about the picture that moved. And I was like, I fucking started that shit. It was amazing. But I couldn't change
That's
it
my
then.
story.
It was my story. So, I mean, that's how things can happen anyway.
That's true.
Kids can be awful, but
But she might. It also, you know what? In my movie,
okay.
this old woman was just sick of the kids pranking her all the time, or calling her cat calling her, and so she's like, "I'm a witch," and she like tricked them in some way to make them think, like, whatever. She's like, you know what? I'm gonna act like a witch because your
Yeah.
little
She'd go,
asshole scared them.
and show her teeth at them. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
she'd put whatever that ointment is first. And then they'd
Right.
run away.
Right.
So she'd
Ugh.
go to get her
In
water and
my
brush
movie,
her
she
teeth at the same time.
embraced it, and she
Right.
scared the shit out of the neighborhood kids because
Oh,
they
that's
were like,
good.
"Oh, people are scary," and she's like, "You have no fucking idea, kid.
Right.
Wait till you get here.
And
Old
then
age is scary."
And then she saves one of the kids who becomes her friend and buys her a cat. It's great. And then they bury it into the wall. Okay. So,
And the cat takes his revenge by sinking the whole cottage into the earth. And
it was her cottage the whole
it's a
time.
very convoluted story we're
It
making
is.
up.
I like it. Let's watch this movie. But we should make it first. Okay. So, kids. The location for the hanging of the witches I saw is now a park with a playground and swing sets.
That happens a lot.
Uh huh.
You know that? Do you know there's a place in London. It was a tree that was a very popular hanging spot for a number of years, for centuries, in fact. And only when Britain outlawed executions of that kind did the tree, I forget what it's called, like the Typhel tree or something. It
Hmm.
became the place where people stood on the corner to like have free speech. And you know why that was the birth of like free speech, on the streets or whatever,
What?
is because if you were condemned to be hanged,
Uh-huh.
you were allowed the courtesy of you could say your last words could be whatever you wanted, and
Oh.
so that spot then became, well, then I'm gonna stand here and speak my mind,
Hmm.
whether I'm being hanged or not.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of the birth of free speech in the 20th century, or
Oh.
the 19th century rather.
All
That
right.
spot
That's
where
good. I like
gallows
that.
used to stand. Anyway, a little tidbit for you. Also in England,
Right. Of course.
the more you know.
Well, I didn't see anything specific, but I have a feeling those swings swing on their own. You know what I'm saying? When it's not windy. Those are always the creepiest videos when you see a swing just like going. It's just like a
And the
set
one
of
next
three
to it's not
things.
moving at all. You're
Yeah.
like, what the fuck?
Why is it
Okay,
just that
the
way? And it
wind's
is,
not that
and
specific.
it's weighted. So it's not.
So it's
Yeah.
not just like free. It's like,
It's
oh, that looks like a butt is sitting in that thing.
yes. There's
An
something weighted into
invisible
it.
butt is weighing it
Those are
down.
kind of my favorite. I love those
They
stories.
are really
Okay.
chilling.
The history of Pendle is quite old because, of course, it is. But it is actually a Bronze Age burial site. Pendle Hill
Ooh.
specifically. So, according to the folklore, the devil was having trouble with the folk at Clitheroe Castle, a few miles west, and wanted rid of it. So, he picked up various large stones and put them in his apron and then threw them towards the castle. Most of them missed, which made him angry, and in a rage, he accidentally dropped a great pile of rocks on the south side of Pendle Hill, creating the Devil's Apronful on Apronful Hill. It's a very rocky little hill. Okay.
I love this image of the
I know.
devil being like, what could
Damn it.
I'm the devil. What can I do to take down that
Mhm.
castle? I know. I'll throw rocks at
I'm going
it.
to throw rocks at the
You're the
rock
devil.
castle. Yeah.
That's all you got?
Back then, the gods were
Kids making up
challenged.
story. Well, that's true.
This would have once been a rather huge tomb, but there's very little left of it. Those who did the quarrying further downhill near where the cars park are likely to have been the culprits who took most of the rocks that once made this huge forgotten tomb. But as you look around, it becomes obvious that you're standing on the much denuded remains of an ancient monument, and you can still get a good idea of how large it was. There are hundreds, maybe even several thousands of stones just on and below the ground. scattering a very well defined, roughly circular area measuring 21 yards by 22 yards right by the side of the path. The edges of this ransacked tomb are pretty well defined around the north and eastern sides. Near the center of the old structure is a very noticeable dip in the ground. Don't know why, if it was like a natural
Hmm.
creation or something they dug specifically,
Yeah.
but for whatever reason, that's what you need to look for for location purposes.
Okay.
Viking tools have been found amongst other items on
Oh,
the hill
wow.
and in the area. It's fucking old.
Yeah.
It's old and has been used. So there is no telling what kind of spirits are on the hill. When you consider that the witch trials encouraged even more pagan worship, because who knows how much of that was done beforehand anyway. And the hill, it stands out. It's almost
Mm-hmm.
a mountain. It is a place that the druids and,
Yeah.
they would go there
Like it had
specifically.
energy.
It had energy. So you've got that old energy. You've got the witch energy. You've got more pagan worship happening there because of the witches, more witchcraft. Devil worshippers have been up there. All kinds of Ouija board seances and other supernatural portal creating things. Theatrics. It's a lot of theatrics, but there is an endless supply of what the fuckery on that hill and in the surrounding areas.
Yes.
People get EVPs, they get weird feelings, they get touched, they get scratched, there's all kinds of shit that happen up on
Ugh.
top of the hill.
I love it.
So
Let's go.
I'm totally just fucking wait. Okay.
Oh God. Okay.
On top of that, George Fox, a Quaker founder,
Mm-hmm,
had his
mm-hmm.
famous vision on Pendle Hill in 1652 during the early years of the Quakers. According to his autobiography, quote, as we traveled, we came near a very great hill called Pendle Hill, and I was moved of the Lord to go up to the top of it, which I did with difficulty. It was so very steep and high. When I was come to the top, I saw the sea bordering upon Lancashire. From the top of this hill, the Lord let me see in what places he had great people to be gathered. Pendle continues to be linked to the Quakers, who use the name for Pendle Hill Quaker Center for Study and Contemplation near Philadelphia. So Pendle Hill is in the States as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
It had quite well. So it's come here. It's another folk way into America that they
Yes.
made. Wow.
Yes. And as far as visiting goes, the Witch's Quarry or Falls Quarry is where old Demdike claimed to have met the devil, and he promised her that she would have anything she desired in return for her soul.
Just help me throw these rocks.
Just need some help with the rocks. He was still there, pissed about dropping them all. You can actually climb and rappel the wall there. They used to not, the
Oh.
owner used to not allow it, but I think you can do it now. They also have a couple of different walks that will take you through some of the major points of interest to the trials. Different farms and home locations of witches and their victims, as well as statues of the witches, are placed around there. There's this really great statue on one of the roads of Alice Nutter. and and she's just like standing there. It's a really cool statue, but it's by the road, and I imagine it scares the shit out of people as they drive by. They're like,
I
"Fucking
think,
witch!"
yeah,
Yeah.
I just think of like the statue of Sam Houston.
Right, but it's not as big. It's more
Not as
life
big.
size.
Oof,
Yeah, and
that
people
makes it
get
even
like,
creepier.
yeah, people get weird energy from the
There's
statue
several
as
all over
well.
Dallas. There are little like life-size statues of people in like normal positions, like on a bench.
Yes,
And you're like, that's a bench where people use it. And there's this guy, oh, that's a guy made of stone. Or there's like children frolicking in,
Mhm.
near a fountain and their statues. It's so fucking weird.
it is
All over Dallas.
all over. Yeah, you can also, of course, hike to the top of the hill to do some ghost hunting, or just get in contact with ghosts from whenever, as well as possible demons, whatever you want to do. But
It's your thing.
the
It's a
walk could be like
smorgasbord.
7.5 miles, like walking around it all if you want to do the whole walk. And
Wow.
you can do it in 2 parts, and it's pretty cool.
Hmm.
And this place is so fucking ready for us. Please, listeners in the UK, go to the fucking hill, and I want you to tell us everything. And I've even found you some events to go to
Oh my
let us
God,
know.
please, please, please.
All right. There are plenty. There are a ton of different witch and ghostly gatherings, especially near Halloween.
Oh,
Like there
yeah.
have been witch parties on the hill.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. There are more than just the following that I'm going to say, but here are a couple that stood out to me. Feel free to choose your own haunt venture, though. Thank you, Melissa, for coining
Haunt
the term.
venture, yes.
She, in our last Ghosticles, she coined haunt venture, so we're going to go with it.
Haunt venture.
The Pendle Witch Weekend, specifically, just Google it, is just under £200 for the weekend of Friday, October 18th through the 20th. You stay in a haunted hostel take a ghost walk with a town historian, a seance, a museum visit with tea and biscuits and shit, more tours, a ghost hunting workshop before the big ghost hunt
Oh my
where
God.
you are taken after eating more yummy food
Holy
to the
shit.
hill
We've
where
got to
more
go.
shenanigans occur, and then you go back to the hostel and do more ghost hunting. Sounds fucking awesome.
I mean, that sounds like a fucking honeymoon.
Yes, so good. Okay, so if you don't want to do the weekend, there's another one that just happens on the 18th.
Okay.
Right. So a couple of days before the other
Mm,
one,
mm, mm.
this goes to Pendle Hill specifically. It's about 40 pounds and takes you to the Barley Mow Inn, which is super fucking haunted.
Barley Mow.
There are psychic medium demonstrations, dinner, the hill ghost hunt. Of course, you have to go to the hill, and the more ghostly hunting and seancey shit back at the end later.
Nice.
I want to go so bad. Come on.
Woo.
There are a lot of options if you go, so please go and tell us all about it until that we can go for ourselves.
Yes.
Do you know if there's any Comic Cons in Lancashire or something anywhere?
Let's just go.
We should do
For the hell of it, let's just go. I mean, let's just go. Let's just fucking do it.
Do it.
Oh my God.
So that's some of the hauntings and a little more
Ooh.
history of Pendle Hill specifically.
And things to do. I love
Things
it.
to do.
I love it.
It
You're like
sounds
their
so
Chamber
good.
of Commerce, Jane.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Maybe they'll pay me to visit. And so that is a Pendle witch.
Thank
haunting.
you. It's still fucked up. Such a fucked up
It's so
story.
fucked up.
So fucked up.
Do you want to take a little break?
Let's take a little break and then
Okay.
I'll get into my subject.
Okay. All right, we are back.
We are back. Oh my God. Okay, so I've wanted to do something about this guy for a while, but it's such a hard subject to tackle because there's so much. So I decided this is kind of an overview
Okay.
of the occult side of the life of Carl Gustav Jung, one of the most famous psychologists.
Yeung?
Jung.
Jung.
German.
All right, Jung. Got it.
Yeah, Jung. I pronounce
I
it
see
Jung.
it
I
now.
could be wrong. And for
I just see
anyone,
it in my head.
I do not pretend to be an expert in either psychology, psychoanalysis, or psychiatry, or for that matter on Jung or Freud. But I know
He's
enough
not-
about them to start a conversation.
He's not going to pretend it right now.
Yeah, I over drinks absolutely,
Yeah.
but right now. But so, do you know about Carl Jung at all? Does that name ever mean
The
anything?
name
It's
does-
CG.
yeah, I've heard it.
It's CG Jung is what he's normally known as.
Yes,
CG
yes.
Jung, right?
I've seen the name
And
for sure.
he's extraordinarily influential psychologist
Mhm.
who he wasn't a student of Freud's, but he was an associate of Freud's, a colleague of Freud's when he was young, and kind of Freud took him under his wing, and they had a major disagreement, and Jung for a long time was kind of the Plato to Freud's Aristotle. You know, there was
Okay.
just two schools of thought where like Jung was like they just went a different direction, and he's still very influential, like his thinking, and he still founded a lot of the concepts that psychiatry still uses today,
Oh,
like the archetypes.
Foundational.
Yes, so like the idea of archetypes, the idea of dream interpretation,
I
meaning this
love
kind of
dream
things.
interpretations.
Well, and Jung was all about that, and Freud, was the first to write about the interpretation of dreams in a scientific context. But Jung took it further because for Freud, everything tended to reduce to just these basic drives of human instinct, and Jung disagreed with that. Jung was like, no, there's more to it than that, and here's my thinking on it. But Jung was a very he had a bizarre life, and he had there were a lot of occult influences in his thought it's lesser known. Because his professional publications are very like, oh yes, this, that, and the other, and here's the psychological principles. And he wrote a little bit about things like dreams and paranormal experiences, but not much until later in life when he was like, oh, here's this. But it goes back.
Well, it makes sense though, because I think if you are someone who realizes the power the brain has over your body and your life, then it stands to reason that power would be more
Right.
than.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about Jung's ideas and what
What's
inspired
his
them.
time period? When's he
This
existing?
is 20th century. So
Early
like this is the earliest. Well, he died in the 60s, I believe, or
All right.
70s. So it was
So
pretty
mid.
much the first,
He had
the
like
first, like-
the best furniture.
like the first 2/3 of Jung. No shit. We'll actually talk a little bit about that.
Oh.
So I'm entitled this part Young at heart because I'm cheesy like that. But
I love it.
let's just tell you a little bit. Let's set the scene. Now, first of all, it takes chutzpah to argue psychology with Sigmund Freud. Luckily, for stout Germanic stock like Carl Gustav Jung, an early advocate of psychoanalysis and later its founder's most famous rival, chutzpah was never in short supply. As a young man in Vienna, he was about 30 something. He'd come to the master with a puzzling dream, one he felt resisted standard Freudian interpretation. Freud invited Jung
He
to
wasn't
take the
fucking his
couch.
mother? That's what that was about?
No,
Sorry.
Freud invited Jung to take the couch and set about unpacking the loaded imagery springing from Jung's unconscious. Try though he might to dissect the younger colleague's dream in the harsh light of scientific inquiry, or at least what passed for it in those days, according to Freud. Freud, then in his 50s, couldn't get Jung to agree with his assessment of the dream. Now, Jung downplayed this at the time. Papa Freud didn't exactly take opposing views in stride, and he knew this, but it did bring about a sea change in Jung's burgeoning worldview, especially as it concerned psychology and the nature of the human mind. Now, inconsequential as a simple disagreement over symbolism may appear, much like the dream under consideration, it was only the tip of the iceberg. What began as a tiny rift between two of the 20th century's most influential thinkers, one of them then established, the other yet to make his mark, but soon to go on record, actually ignited the pagan revival, still flourishing today.
Oh.
In the dream, Jung saw himself descending the levels of a large multi-story mansion from attic to cellar. Its decor and furnishings grew progressively more antiquated the deeper he went. The upper floors boasted all the modern amenities, plumbing, electricity, telephone, fine imported upholstery, etc. The lower floors, in contrast, grew dank and medieval. He had to navigate by torchlight past smoky fireplaces and moss-worn gargoyles until at last he found himself in a massive subterranean cavern. All around him were the remains of his long-dead ancestors. Their bones towered in great heaps, acting like pylons on which the floors of the house above were supported. Now, Freud took this part of the dream to be a clear-cut expression of what he called thanatos, literally the death instinct. The human psyche, he theorized, comes equipped with fundamental drives, most notably eros or libido, the compulsion to fuck, which our ego suppresses for the sake of propriety, giving rise to all sorts of complexes and issues, you know the rest, yada yada yada. In opposition to the all-pervasive libido, however, stands thanatos, the death drive, or what Freud would term our innate yearning for oblivion. Jung didn't buy this. The cavern and its relationship to the house above in the dream seemed infinitely more profound. Now, in hindsight, the dream and Jung's inner rebellion against Freud's hot take on it was a watershed moment for him. It inspired his own unique theory of how the human psyche worked. And as psychological models go, Jung's is not only hugely popular, its implications reach far beyond anything Freud would have been comfortable with. According to Jung, and stick with me because this gets pretty heady.
All right, I have a lot of cough syrup in my body.
Maybe the perfect state to receive this in.
All right.
According to Jung, the human psyche consists of multiple levels, much like the mansion in his dream. The topmost level, as you might expect, is waking consciousness. Its contents are narrow, corresponding more or less with how we see the world and ourselves at any given moment. Beneath that lay several increasingly wide-ranging and mysterious levels of unconscious. First, there's the personal unconscious, in which are stored all the memories and sensations accumulated thus far in one's life, and from which flow the shallower contents of our dreams. Beneath this layer, however, churns the collective unconscious, a kind of free-flowing Alexandrian library connecting all of us to a deep ancestral past. This, according to Jung, is the domain of what he called the archetypes. That is to say, models that kind of propel us as a species. Most people are familiar with the
Did you say
archetypes.
species?
Species, I might have.
Okay.
It was a Freudian slip.
Oh,
I'm not sure what it means, but
species.
species.
You were
I
just
was trying to be Sean Connery. It's one
Connery.
of the archetypes, maybe. But most people are
Do you
familiar
think
with.
Sean Connery? Sorry, this has nothing to do with anything. But you're getting me on cough medicine. So,
So wow, you're
do you-
just like freewheeling
I'm freewheeling.
associations.
Yes, Sean Connery. He's known for his like.
It's that
Yeah.
Scottish brogue.
But but it's more so because he does a lot of SHing when there's not an SH. Do you think that's because his name is SEAN and he's just applied his name in a narcissistic way to everything around him?
Maybe he had a speech impediment when he was a kid, and so he had like he got made fun of for not being able to say his own name, and so he's like, "God damn it, I'm going to
It's
say that all the time."
Sean.
It's
It's
Sean Connery.
Sean. And it's
I don't know how true it
species.
is that he does that all the time. I just think it's kind of a weird S thing.
He does it all the time.
I don't know. I can't do it. Anyway, back to Jung.
Sorry. I'm
That's
just
another
saying.
episode. So the collective unconscious is the domain of the archetypes, and most people are familiar with the archetypes, at least some of them, from literature. There's like the hero, the trickster, the mother, the wise old man, God, the devil, etc. To Jung, these are universal archaic images derived from the collective unconscious. They're basically the psychological equivalent of instinct. They are,
Mm.
so to speak, potentialities inherited from our ancestors, hidden forms of thought that spark profound personal transformation when brought into consciousness by way of some culturally charged image or act. Pretty heady stuff, and whether or not you believe in the influence of archetypes as such, and some people don't, the influence of Jung's theory cannot be denied. The fact Jung saw himself as the idea's vessel rather than its creator should tell you something. It's like the very notion of a collective unconscious rose unbidden from the collective
Is
unconscious.
it that it keeps the universe balanced or
No, I don't think it's that the collect. It's basically Jung's way of saying all of our minds are connected at a
right.
deeper level. Like we share this thing. And when he says like archetypes, he's not talking about specific things. He's talking about they're almost like categories of thought. So like the
Right.
idea of a wise old man, that seems to be an archetype. It seems to be a shape, if you will,
Right.
in our deep unconscious that gets easily filled by certain things. So when you encounter, say, the character of Dumbledore or Gandalf or
Mhm.
whatever, it resonates with you immediately
Right. The
because
guy in
there's
The
already
Shining.
because there's already a there's already a place for him in your mind
Right.
without you knowing it. And so it's basically it's the things the collective unconscious, according to Jung, as best I understand
It's
him.
like pareidolia, but with
Well, it
consciousness.
kind of, but it's just more detailed than
Dol
pareidolia, because pareidolia,
Dolia.
dolia, thank you.
Pareidolia is pareidolia.
But
We'll
it
get it.
basically he's saying psychologically the power of an archetype is that it has a control over your conscious thought, whether you are aware of it or not. And part of the business, as far as Jung is concerned, of psychoanalysts is to bring, if you're ailing in some way psychologically, if you have some
Mhm.
sort of mental issue, at least the prevailing theory of psychoanalysis is that, well, there's something going on in your unconscious, and the only way to really fix it is to bring it into your consciousness so you
Mm.
can fully integrate it into your
Oh,
waking life.
like
And so,
past lives.
well,
Like,
sort
but
of,
I mean,
well,
that's the idea with a
that
past life. If you acknowledge that this thing has happened in a
that
past
is,
life,
but
bring it into your conscious, then you can handle it. So it's
true,
finding these
true,
subline
but
things that
most
are in this life.
psychologists will not go that far and
No,
say
no, no.
past
I'm
life,
not
but
saying
things that happen in your life, like, okay, well, why am I afraid to get on a plane? Well, if
right.
you under psychoanalysis, you may uncover some unconscious memory of a parent maybe locking you in a closet,
Or
and
just
something
yeah,
like that.
I'm not saying that you're going as far into that, but it's
Well,
that same idea of this thing that happened that you
yes.
may not remember, or you may remember, but it doesn't seem to be like your
Hmm.
very first
Hmm.
memory
Hmm.
has a very impactful like it
It
creates who you
does.
are as a person. And
It does.
even, like if you are, because when I went to my therapist and my mom got divorced when I was very young,
Mm,
and I was probably 4 months old to 6 months old when all that was happening. And I never
right.
knew my biological father, any of that stuff. So even it being that young, it was formative about
Yeah.
that separation. And
And so it expresses itself unconsciously in your day-to-day life in ways that
yes,
you're not aware of until a psychologist or a therapist can help you make that connection, and you can
yes,
begin dealing with
that
the sort
makes
of
sense.
base trauma.
Yeah.
Now for Jung, the difference in that level of that would be like, so that memory of,
Hmm.
that trauma
Well,
of
I
having
don't
experienced
remember
that
it, but
would be, but your body does,
yes,
and your
exactly.
unconscious has
Yeah,
its own memory, its own kind of store of memory that you may not that are not you're not conscious of, but
exactly.
it's memory, it
It's
still
affected. It's
functions like memory,
created
right?
me. Yeah.
But that would belong to your personal unconscious because it's a
Hmm.
memory of something that happened in your lifetime.
Hmm.
Whereas in Jung's consideration, the deeper level, the collective unconscious isn't necessarily, he's not, as again, as I understand him, saying that it's a memory of something that happened in a past life. They seem to be things that we are, eh, how do I explain this?
Yeah. No, I'm not
The
saying a
but
past
the
life. It's
archetypes,
like that,
right?
but
But
not.
Jung did believe in past lives and
Oh
grew
well,
to
that's
believe it
fine.
because of this. So we'll get to that a little bit. But an archetype is essentially, it's something that all of us respond to, that gets filled with, that comes from, like, source. It's the reason, like, say, Gandalf or a Dumbledore or whoever is such a compelling character, ready made, like, you don't need
Right.
much, is because we seem to respond to that with very little provocation.
Mhm.
And Jung would say, I think correctly, that it's because it's appealing to something that belongs to our deep unconscious, that's not from a conscious memory. You may have not ever in your life known anyone who played that role, so you're not
Right.
comparing it to anyone, but there's something in your memory, as like your deep collective unconscious, that
Right.
your memory as a member of this species, that, like, oh, that's the wise man, or
Right.
that's the mother
Gotcha.
goddess, or that's
Gotcha.
whatever. And so that's the archetypes are really important to Jung, because figuring out what they are is really important to what's called the individuation process, which we'll get into a little bit.
Okay.
Now, so the collective unconscious was really Jung's big step forward in psychological thought, but a similar concept can be found, it just so happens, in Theosophy, the esoteric American religion established by Russian medium Helen Blavatsky in the late 19th century, which borrows heavily from Hinduism and Buddhism. Now,
Okay.
according to Blavatsky, who we've talked about a little bit here and there, and we've talked a little bit about Theosophy here and there, I should do a full episode on it because she's a fascinating figure, a bit of a trickster herself.
Mm.
According to Blavatsky, an ancient and secretive brotherhood of spiritual adepts known as Mahatmas reside throughout the world, though they're mostly centered in Tibet. These masters have cultivated great wisdom and supernatural powers and disseminate their teachings through a chosen exalted few, Blavatsky being one of them.
Of course.
Now, whether you believe in that or not, vital to Theosophy is something called the Akashic Record, a
Mm. I've
supposed
heard of that.
compendium of human events, thoughts, words, and emotions that have ever existed or ever will exist, past, present, and future, all encoded in a non physical plane of existence called the etheric plane, and which certain people, through meditation and various supernatural rites, can have access to.
You can
And
reach
it's
the
it's kind of
plane.
a working theory of how divination works. Well, how are you able to tell the future or dip into the past that you didn't personally experience? Well, because you were able to access the Akashic record. So
Mm.
it's easy to see the parallels with Jung's idea of the collective unconscious. His emphasis on its role in the formation of one's personality, which is far more crucial, he felt, than Freud's idea of libido, because for Freud, everything was sex. Like,
Right.
our personal drives, everything boils
And
down to
that's why
sex.
he's marketed so well.
Yeah, but sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Yeah.
Um, but to, but Jung disagreed with that. He's like, no, I don't think it is. Libido does play a part of it, but there's something much deeper that's far more formative and far richer.
Mhm.
Um, and that's where he and Freud split. They parted ways. It ultimately led to a schism between he and Freud that would never heal. Freud also wasn't a huge fan of the occult associations underpinning Jung's key ideas, though it must be said, Freud didn't discount paranormal phenomenon outright. He merely dodged them almost out of paranoia for fear of discrediting psychoanalysis among his colleagues in the scientific community.
Right.
Freud always really struggled to say that psychoanalysis and his concepts were scientific, and they absolutely were not. They were more poetic.
Right.
Jung would go on to say, or I'm putting words in his mouth. Jung would probably say of Freud, well, his ideas work because they appeal to certain archetypes in the human mind, but they're not scientific. Like for Freud, he thought you can actually, with the right equipment, you could locate these drives. You could locate the libido or eros and the death principle, all that in the human mind. And Jung knew better. He's like, you can't. It's different. It's a different plane of thing that science can't really. The same science that can measure the distance between here and the moon is not the same science that can
Yeah.
apply to human
You measure things
psychology.
differently
Yeah, and this
in
is all before
psychology.
neuropsychology, of course. But some people still think Jung still has value, even.
But without Freud, we wouldn't have gotten to Jung because
Exactly.
yeah.
And so Freud by no means was Jung the end of Freud, but
Mhm.
Jung was just like one of the he was Freud taken in a slightly different direction,
Right.
and he just got really popular because of it. Now, when it came to the occult associations of his theories, Jung had no such compunction like Freud did. He was, in fact, no stranger to occult practices. In fact, it's fair to say the shadowy world of esoteric thought left quite a mark on his childhood in Germany. You see, his mother and grandmother were mediums who held regular
Mm.
seances to consult dead family
I
members.
fucking love that.
Jung attended and was often encouraged to try his hand at channeling the spirit world with, he said later, some success. He
Hmm.
recalls in his memoirs an afternoon when, following a heated argument among family members, the table at which these seances were conducted, though not being used to that purpose at the time, suddenly split in half with a thunderous crack. Later, an heirloom kitchen knife inherited from his mother was found wrapped in a cloth, broken into several neat pieces inexplicably.
Ooh.
Now, these were things where Jung would later think there's a connection between psychology, like the state of the human mind and the physical world. Like there are things, and we'll get into that, but he started going, yeah, he believed in visions and psychic abilities and things like that. And he thought all of it could make sense within this kind of model that he was kind of working on. In 1913, at the age of 38, Jung experienced firsthand the awesome and sometimes horrifying power of the unconscious mind when it has something to say. He was plagued by disembodied voices, what we would call poltergeist activity now.
Oh.
He also was racked by visions constantly, some of them of other worlds, and some of these other worlds were positively hellish. Jung, in fact, feared he was having a mental breakdown, perhaps even presenting symptoms of late onset schizophrenia. Usually, schizophrenia starts presenting late teens, early 20s.
Yeah.
And here he was in his 30s going, what? Nevertheless, Jung persevered. Intrigued as much as disoriented by his experiences, Jung determined to run with it, convinced his unconscious was trying to convey vital information he couldn't move forward without. He even went so far as to enhance the conversation by using hallucinogens,
Of course.
sequestering himself in the attic of his home in Switzerland and tripping balls. The copious notes and illustrations amassed in these improvised rituals were gathered into the now much coveted, highly controversial, and seldom seen Red Book, a massive tome compiled by Jung over 16 years. As of 2008, fewer than a dozen people have actually been allowed to read it.
Oh, wow.
I think that's changed now. People have been large sections of it. I
Where
think
is
are
it?
available. It's kept in his estate in Zurich, I
Oh,
believe.
let's go there too.
I would love to go. Now,
European tour.
Jung's harrowing encounter with the collective unconscious left him certain he'd been deified. In fact, he wrote a lot of his stuff after this, and he felt he was channeling a spirit that he named Philemon.
Mm.
So he kind of shared. There's a lot of famous thinkers that had this kind of experience in that time period, in that era. Because you have Aleister Crowley,
Mhm.
who thought he was in touch with some spirit, and this was only a generation before, or actually back about the same time, actually, if I'm getting my dates correct. But it's all within the space of less than a century.
Yeah.
You have Blavatsky, who just a generation before had felt she was receiving visions. Now, Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, she, turns out she was a lot of her works, like the big, huge epic tome that her stuff is based on, was largely found to be plagiarized from other people. But she did popularize it, so she's owed that.
If you're gonna steal.
Yeah. Jung's harrowing encounter with the collective unconscious left him certain he'd been deified. Okay, we covered that. He later interpreted his visionary states as an initiation into an ancient Hellenistic mystery cult dedicated to the god Mithras. Now, this belief
Whoa.
system held a great deal of sway in the final years of the Roman Empire and is thought by scholars to have been heavily plagiarized by another religion then in its infancy, Christianity.
Ooh.
According to the author Richard Knoll, who wrote a book, The Jung Cult, quote, during 1913 and 1914, Jung withdrew from his former bourgeois lifestyle, and it lived out a wild, intense, mad fantasy life during which he believed he was initiated. He descended into a cave and had all sorts of strange dreams and fantasies, which he described in his book, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, in the chapter Confrontation with the Unconscious. But that book...
Is he doing all the drugs then too?
Yeah, and having orgies and having like these rituals. He was really living it up.
That was very Peter Warlock of him.
Uh-huh.
That's the same time period.
Yes, it
Peter
is.
Warlock for sure. So Aleister
Mhm.
Crowley would have been before, just a little bit before.
Yeah, but still
Yeah.
within the same couple generations.
Yeah, right.
But that book, according to Knoll, only has the watered-down version of what happened in his own memoirs of the account. Knoll recounts Jung's vision of himself standing with arms outstretched as though in the throes of crucifixion, a giant serpent coiled around his body. At the climax, his head becomes that of a lion, transforming him into an amalgam of two gods, Kronos and Christ. Because of the German cultural context of the time, says Knoll, Jung was a socialist, which would later be Nazism.
Right. Well,
that is
sort
saying,
of.
well, the National Socialist Party in Germany was what would
Right.
become
They weren't
Nazism
really
at the time.
socialist.
At the time,
They
yeah,
like to
yeah,
claim it.
yeah. So it doesn't mean the same thing anymore, but at the
No.
time, yes. Now, Mithraism.
Well, it was all that was all marketing. That was all a ploy.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that was all a
yeah.
ploy to get
Um,
people to join them
well,
thinking, and then that's
sadly,
all
we're
it
not
was.
done with the Nazis in this story. Now,
Oh,
because the
no.
German cultural context
Sadly,
of
we're
the
not done with the
time,
Nazis, period.
no fucking shit. Jung was a socialist. Mithraism was
Mhm,
thought to be a direct extension. That was the cult of
mhm.
Mithras was thought to be a direct extension from ancient Persia, and therefore probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest, of the mystery cults in the Hellenistic world. And furthermore,
Ooh.
it had a direct link with the old Aryan homeland, Iran and India. Jung was steeped in all this and believed he was an initiate in the most Aryan of all the mystery cults, the most ancient Aryan spiritual experience you could possibly have. End quote. That's all from Knoll. Now, Knoll bases his view on how Jung brought his visionary experiences to bear upon the everyday world. He self-consciously gathered a community of German-speaking expats around him as a prophet would, Knoll says. You wouldn't get that necessarily from reading his few professional publications during World War I, but if you read private letters or patients' diaries and other archival materials, you begin to see what's going on. He deliberately created a charismatic religious group. End quote. Now, whether you agree with Knoll on this point or not, Jung did believe that in the years leading up to World War II, his homeland was in thrall to a powerful archetype peculiar to the German people, one poised to wreak havoc on the world, the archetype of Odin. Now, though this amounts to way more than I have time to go into here, in Jung's view, the Nazis were essentially a catastrophic expression of the Odin archetype, the cunning allfather and lord of war. When addressing the masses, for example, Hitler, so Jung thought, was clearly possessed by something larger, more compelling, and more destructive than himself. Now, earlier in 1923, writing to one of his pupils, Jung had said, quote, like Wotan's oaks, Wotan being Odin, like Odin's oaks, the gods were felled, and a wholly incongruous Christianity, born of monotheism on a much higher level, was grafted onto the stumps. The Germanic man is still suffering from this mutilation. We must dig down to the primitive in us, for only out of the conflict between civilized man and the Germanic barbarian will there come what we need, a new experience of God. End quote.
Hmm.
Now, in his book, The Return of Odin, Richard Rudgley maintains that Odin exists in our collective unconscious and has profoundly influenced the course of our modern world. Jung described Odin as an archetype, a psychic complex that does not need an independent existence outside our minds to affect change in the real world. For modern man, Odin may be all in the mind, but we can't just spirit him away by reason, because he embodies the irrational side of the Western psyche. These archetypes and behavioral models aren't just objects of worship, says Rudgley. They are the ancient blueprints still working in the modern mind. Now, Jung openly flouted the Judeo-Christian tradition, but not as a scientist per se. He merely used scientific language to convey ideas meant to make his own magical, polyistic pagan worldview more palatable to a secularized world. Now, Jung clearly regularly attended seances for decades and
Hmm.
claimed to have witnessed his share of psychic manifestations. Though he originally deconstructed spirits in purely psychological terms, even delivering a lecture to the effect to the Society of Psychical Research in 1919, he later doubted, quote, whether an exclusively psychological approach can do justice to the phenomenon in question. The spirit hypothesis, he said, yields better results.
Hmm.
His ideas on the paranormal culminated in what he called synchronicity, that is, meaningful connections that manifest through coincidence but have no apparent causal link. Though it eluded demonstration, scientifically for obvious reasons, Jung proposed synchronicity as the chief mechanism behind various divination methods like the I Ching and the tarot, which
Mhm.
he felt, if looked into, tended to yield pretty remarkable results.
Huh.
This all plays back to the archetype. Things like
Right.
that work because they speak to the archetypes in us that go farther
Well, and
back
that's
than
what
our own
tarot
personal
cards
history.
are. This is the
Exactly.
person that represents this, and this is what this means. Yeah.
Now, from the
It's like
1940s,
horoscopes too. Like
mhm, yeah,
you
exactly. And
have
Jung
like
included all of that.
yeah.
Now, from the 1940s on, Jung's writings focused on. Thank you.
Coast. I had to give him a coaster.
I was
So.
like, I can't put it down. From the 1940s on, his writings focused on the medieval occult science of alchemy. Now, poring over scores of arcane works written by long forgotten sorcerers, Jung was struck by how similar the symbols, texts, and magical rites of alchemy were to the psychoanalytical process. Alchemists, he said, weren't so much concerned with transmuting lead into gold. This was just an allegory. The practitioners of what would eventually prove to be the beginnings of chemistry were, in fact, concerned with what psychologists now call individuation, the process by which a person integrates the contents of their unconscious into their conscious mind. In other words, alchemists were attempting to perfect the soul. The crucial stages of turning
Huh,
lead
they're
into
just trying to
gold.
make fire out of shit.
No, gold out of lead, right?
Oh, that's
Um,
but
but
using fire.
well, yeah, using fire, and the crucial stages of turning lead into gold, according to the alchemists, which are blackening, whitening, reddening, and yellowing, each with their own like intense, like it's I could talk for hours about alchemy, were to Jung apt metaphors for the journey of personal growth. Now, as the second half of the century rolled on, Jung became interested in the UFO epidemic. True to form,
Oh.
Jung couched his views on the matter in language crafted to allow for multiple interpretations and kind of protect him from criticism from materialists. Asked by New Republic editor Gilbert A. Harrison to offer up his views on the flying saucer craze, Jung replied, quote, "The problem of UFOs is, as you rightly say, a very fascinating one, but it is as puzzling as it is fascinating, since, in spite of all observations I know of, there is no certainty about their very nature. On the other side, there is an overwhelming material pointing to the legendary or mythological aspect. As a matter of fact, the psychological aspect is so impressive that one almost must regret that UFOs seem to be real after all. I have followed up the literature as much as possible, and it looks to me as if something were seen and even confirmed by radar, but nobody knows exactly what. In consideration of the psychological aspect of the phenomenon, I have written a booklet about it, which is soon to appear. It is also in the process of being translated into English. Unfortunately, being occupied with other tasks, I am unable to meet your proposition. Being rather old, I have to economize my energies,"
Hmm.
says Jung. Now, in his book, Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky, Jung says, "In the threatening situation of the world today, when people are beginning to see that everything is at stake, the projection creating fantasy soars beyond the realm of earthly organizations and powers into the heavens, into interstellar space, where the rulers of human fate, the gods, once had their abode in the planets. Even people who would never have thought that a religious problem could be a serious matter that concerned them personally are beginning to ask themselves fundamental questions. Under these circumstances, it would not be at all surprising if those sections of the community who ask themselves nothing were visited by visions, by a widespread
Oh.
myth, seriously believed in by some and rejected as absurd by others." Now, at a time when the popular imagination was engaged in an either or proposition concerning this most troubling of paranormal phenomenon, UFOs were either real or total bullshit, Jung towed the line. Less concerned with whether flying saucers existed in a material sense, Jung dared to ask what the belief in them might signify. What was going on in the world at large that so many people in so many countries were looking up at the skies and coming away convinced they'd seen impossible objects? Objects, Jung couldn't help but reflect, often bore a striking resemblance to the mandalas of Eastern thought. Now, the mandala, for those unfamiliar, is a geometric configuration of symbols used in rituals to represent various gods or planes of existence. They play a vital role in Hinduism, Shintoism, Buddhism, Jainism. Jung was absolutely fascinated by mandalas and theorized the onslaught of UFO sightings in the 50s was the collective unconscious attempting to communicate with humanity as a whole,
Hmm.
manifesting itself in ways similar to the visions that presumably gave rise to the mandalas eons before.
Oh.
As Jung staggered into his twilight years, head full of mythological and spiritual insights, he threw himself heart and soul into his own personal myth. In 1923, following the death of his mother, Jung had purchased land on Lake Zurich in Switzerland, where he constructed a quaint fairy tale tower. Dubbed Bollinger Tower,
Look,
Jung.
another tower. It's
Mhm.
not a shit tower though.
No, quite the opposite. Dubbed Bollinger Tower, Jung added an additional story in 1927 after the death of his wife to commemorate her passing and, in his own words, to signify, quote, an extension of consciousness achieved in old age. In 1950, on the occasion of his 75th birthday, Jung set up a stone cube on the lake shore, just west of the tower, inscribing it on three sides. One side contains a quote taken from the Rosarium Philosophorum.
All right.
It's Latin. It means, I'm not going to read the Latin, but it translated means, "Here stands the mean, uncomely stone. 'Tis very cheap in price. The more it is despised by fools, the more loved by the wise." A dedication is also inscribed on the side, on this side of the stone, just in memory of his 75th birthday. The second side of the cube depicts a homunculus bearing a lantern and wearing a hooded cape. The Greek inscription attributed to Heraclitus,
Heraclitus?
Heraclitus, Hercules, but
Hercules.
not.
It's a
Uh,
lot of Hercules.
quote,
Hercules.
right.
I can't say it now.
Time is a child, playing like a child, playing a board game, the kingdom of the child. This is Telosphorus, who roams through the dark regions of this cosmos and glows like a star out of the depths. He points the way to the gates of the sun and to the land of dreams. The third side of the cube is the side that faces the lake. It bears a Latin inscription taken more or less from the alchemical texts he studied. Quote, I am an orphan, alone, and nevertheless I am found everywhere. I am one, but opposed to myself. I am youth and old man at one and the same time. I have known neither father nor mother because I have had to be fetched out of the deep like a fish, or felled like a white stone from heaven. In woods and mountains I roam, but I am hidden in the innermost soul of man. I am mortal for everyone, yet I am not touched by the cycle of aeons.
And then it finishes by saying, I love gold. What's the fourth side?
The fourth side.
Of the cube.
No, that was the fourth side. There was all
Oh,
three
I thought
sides.
that was the third side
Yeah,
of the cube.
yeah.
The door.
Yes, the
The
door.
fourth is the door.
I don't know. But yeah, so that is as best I could possibly do. And I'll have to revisit it sometime because there's just so much to unpack. But yeah, so he goes from having a dream that makes him think, well, maybe Freud's wrong about,
Well, he doesn't
reducing
just have
everything
a
to
dream. He has a whole background that is a mystic
exactly.
background
And
that informs him.
his grandmother and mother, who were mediums, were also part of a Reformed Christian sect that were part of that. And there's something about I forgot to mention it, but his grandfather, who was also named Karl, it was just spelled differently, K, attended a weird Odinic ritual that took place in Germany, where like they a bunch of romantics got together and like rented out this castle tower, and they like had this weird kind of thing where they like burned books that they felt were not they burned books that were not German. I mean, it's kind of troubling to think about, the other people that'd be burning books just a couple generations later.
Right.
And there were ties to the Nazis. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
But
Well, I
it
mean,
seems
it's
like
First
I don't think
World
Jung.
War time period,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
transitioned very easily
Mhm.
into that Nazi.
But a really fascinating subject.
That
and just the fact
is.
that one of the founders of well, I don't want to say pop psychology because that sounds pejorative, but the most people got
Pop
into
psych.
psychology. Yeah.
I mean, it's a class.
It's
Pop psych is a class.
But a lot of it has to do with Jung, and Jung had a lot to say and think about the paranormal, which he's like, yeah, that shit's real, because why not?
Because why not? Well, and again, if you have an elevated thought about how the brain works and that it can work on these other planes of existence, then why would there not be
Right.
one that's more than normal? It's supernatural,
I
That
was
makes sense.
obsessed with Jung when I was younger, and
Uh-huh.
I read a lot of stuff. He's difficult to read,
Well,
I find, but he's really rewarding. And but it's fascinating. He's a fascinating guy.
yeah, that's
Fascinating
crazy.
guy.
Cool. Thank you
You're welcome.
for that.
You're welcome.
My
Thank you for
my brain feels currently like it's about 3 minutes behind.
about to tap into the collective unconscious.
I might be there right now. I'm not sure. So we have a bit of an announcement.
We do.
We are coming up on our 1 year. Cheers.
It's so crazy. Cheers.
We're just drinking soda because we're
on
both
too
high.
much cough medicine to have any alcohol, but we're drinking soda.
I am doing fine right now. But we're coming up on a year. October 1st is our year anniversary.
Yes.
For having the podcast. And we'll be at 52 episodes in 3 weeks, I think.
That's so crazy.
So
That's
crazy.
so great.
4 weeks?
4
I
weeks,
don't know.
something like that.
Math. A month. We're going to be there in a month. So, just like we did when we first announced the podcast, we announced a month ahead of time that we were going to be starting the podcast, so to send us your stories.
Right.
We are announcing a month ahead of time that we are officially and finally going to have a Patreon.
Yay!
So we're announcing it. We have a deadline. We're going to have to fucking do it now.
We're gonna fucking stick to it.
We will be offering things.
Some fun stuff. We got some good ideas.
We have great ideas. Please, though, if you have any ideas,
We're open to yours.
we are open to hearing what you have to say, things that you want to hear from us, things that you would want in a Patreon, what you would expect. We are going to try to keep it simple because time is precious. We've also discussing maybe creating somewhat of a network and bringing some other podcasts onto into our little world.
Oh, that'd be so much fun. We know so many interesting people that should be doing podcasts.
So that is a potential, but definitely the Patreon is where we want to start.
Mm.
And that will be on October 1st. We'll be releasing that. I will try to remember to announce it on Twitter and Instagram and stuff tomorrow. But if I'm
Yes.
on cough medicine, there's no promises. So we definitely, though, tomorrow is the 1st because we're recording this on Saturday. So the podcast doesn't come out till Monday. So it'll be a day late.
Right.
But
right.
we wanted you guys to know that and have all that information. Email us at ghoulintentions.com or ghoulintentionspodcast at gmail.com.
Yes.
You can also submit your stories and submit ideas with your stories on the website, ghoulintentions.com. Tweet us, ghoulintent, at ghoulintent. Our Instagram is ghoulintentions. You can message us there, but I don't know if I'll read it because I still get confused about the Instagram messages. I'm just gonna be honest. And so
Too many apps.
there's so many apps. But let us know what you guys want because we really want to make sure that the listeners are getting what you want and that we are still getting to do the fun stuff that we love to do.
Yes.
So, I mean, first things first, I'm going to make Michael read some Edgar Allan Poe. That will be, of course, one of those things. I'll probably have some story reading in there too.
Yes.
We've discussed possibly doing, the live reactions to those.
Really fun to
the
the
top
videos. We have
fives and
so
the-
much fun
the other
reacting
scary
to
videos,
anyway.
Stuff like that. But if there's anything more, please let us know.
Yeah.
And
thank you for listening to us for, almost a
almost
year
a
now,
year.
guys.
This is amazing.
A lot of you have been with us from the beginning.
Yeah, and we keep growing every
And
month.
those
We're
of you that
still
haven't, a lot
blown
of you
away.
that have come on board recently have gone back and made up for lost time by listening to
Mhm.
everything. Like I have a friend that just recently, he's like, yeah, I just binged all your episodes in like a couple of weeks.
I
And
know.
I'm like, damn.
I know. Yeah. So we really, really appreciate all of the support. And
Yeah. Because we have a fucking ball
I
doing this.
know.
If you
We're having the
can't
best
tell,
time.
we have a ball doing this.
Yes,
Even when
yes.
we're sick.
That's right. We still do it. Damn it. We come through.
Yep.
So yeah, with that, just, keep all of those things in mind. We cannot tell you how much we love you and appreciate you giving us the opportunity to do this, and then also listen to it. So we're not just talking into the ether. That's really cool too. That, we're not alone, right? We're not
Right.
alone in our
It's
passion
nice
for
to
these ghost
know.
stories and the true stories,
Mhm.
and just the spooky ones
Just
as well.
the fun
And the
how much fun it is to
history.
be scared and to also learn
Yeah.
things.
And that shit's fucked up, and that's okay. We can talk about it
yes.
and indulge in those morbid things. It's a part of death is a part of life, so it only
Right.
makes sense.
Right.
And our anxieties, talking about all of our anxieties and shit like that.
Yep.
It's so nice.
It's important. It's a healing. This is a healing. It's like a campfire. We can all get around and just be real.
And I just feel so much more connected to, I don't know, I guess the collective conscious. But to
Bring it
people,
home.
the people that I meet, when we meet you guys and you say you listen to the podcast, that we are not bullshitting you when we freak out. We love to meet you guys because it's a passion project for us. And
It
so
is.
just a little different.
And we
so.
also love, it's reaching out through story. Because, that's what connects us all is stories. And if you have a story to tell, like, we want to hear it. And, like, we want to tell you our stories. That's what this is all about.
Truth be told, don't tell other people this, but we like you guys better. You're so much cooler than any of the other people we meet.
Much cooler.
So much fucking cooler. It's
And
just
we meet
true.
some really cool people.
We do.
But you're cool.
But you're cooler. I'm not just saying that either. We talk about it all the time. It's like, oh my gosh, we met this person. They're so cool. And we ask for ghost stories when we're in lines. We ask for ghost stories.
Like everyone's just gonna have to wait. We're being told a ghost story.
Right.
Sorry.
Hold on. Hold that thought.
Yeah.
Oh my
Always
gosh.
takes priority.
Yeah. There are a couple in Colorado Springs. We already got one in. But I'm waiting.
I better send it in.
If you are
better send it
listening,
in. If you are listening,
and you're the mortician,
please
send your shit in. We want it so bad. It's so. I mean, this story, you guys, is so good.
It was so good, but
was
we
so
don't.
good.
I don't have the right. We don't have the right to tell
We don't
it.
have the right to tell it. Yeah,
It's
but
your
if he doesn't
story.
write it, we will.
Yeah.
Okay. We will do it. All right. Well, thank you guys again. We appreciate it. Don't forget to message us. Let us know what you think. Don't forget to send in all your creepy stories. And remember, it's okay to sleep with the lights on.